Welcome back to the Worthington Chronicles, where every story is a new adventure. If you're loving our tales of romance and redemption, do us a huge favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with a friend who needs a happy escape. Now let's begin our next story, The Trust Fund Prisoner. The air in the port city of San Lazaro didn't move. It lay on the skin like a warm, wet towel, thick with the smells of salt, diesel, and the faint, sweet rot of garbage left in shadowed alleys. To Austin McMillan, it was all a stage, a grimy, inconvenient backdrop for the main event, himself. He stood on the gleaming teak deck of the Anthem, a 200-foot yacht that was the newest jewel in the McMillan family crown, and felt nothing but a familiar, bone-deep boredom. The champagne in his hand was vintage Krug, the suit was a Zegna tailored to perfection, but the view was of rust-streaked warehouses and the hard, suspicious eyes of the locals who scurried around the docks. "This is it, then," he said, his voice a dry, unimpressed drawl. "The great expansion into South American markets. Smells like fish and failure." His older cousin, Trek, clapped a heavy, familiar hand on his shoulder. Trek was all easy smiles and broad shoulders, the family's man of the people, a role Austin found both tedious and transparent. "Come on, Austin. See the potential. Untapped. Resources. A little rough around the edges, but that's where the real opportunity lies." Trek's smile was a practice thing, never quite reaching the cold calculation in his eyes. Austin had always seen it, he realized, but had dismissed it as simple ambition, a harmless, even useful trait in their cutthroat family. Austin shrugged off the hand. "The only resource I'm interested in is the one that gets me back to a city, with a decent martini by tomorrow." He took a sip of champagne, the bubbles doing nothing to cut through the oppressive humidity. He was blind, willfully so, to the true danger. He saw Trek as a grasping, lesser creature, not a patient predator. He didn't notice the subtle nod Trek gave to a hulking man with a scarred cheek standing near a stack of cargo containers. He didn't register the way the local port officials averted their gaze a little too quickly. From the rooftop of a dilapidated cantina overlooking the dock, a pair of binoculars tracked his every move. Behind them was Brittany, an 18-year-old with eyes that had seen too much for her age. She knew the man with the scarred cheek. His name was Rico, and he was a lieutenant in her uncle's organization. She had overheard the plan, whispered in the back room of her family's house amidst cigar smoke and the clink of glasses. Trek McMillan was paying them a fortune to make his pretty boy cousin disappear forever, permanently. Her stomach had coiled into a knot of cold disgust. She knew criminals. She was born of them. But this was different. This was a betrayal so clean, so bloodless for the betrayer, it felt like a new level of evil. She couldn't go to the authorities. They were all in her uncle's pocket. She couldn't warn Austin directly. He was surrounded by Trek's people, and he'd never believe a local girl anyway. She saw the arrogant tilt of his chin, the way he looked at the world as his personal playground. A direct warning would be a death sentence for her, and likely for him, just sooner. So, she devised a desperate, clever alternative, an idea born from a deep, innate sense of justice and an intimate knowledge of San Lazaro's darkest corners. If she couldn't stop the plan, she could redirect it. She sought out Old Man Hector, who ran the mortuary and for a price asked no questions. She used the last of her own carefully hidden savings to pay him. Then, she manipulated Rico, using a carefully planted rumor about a rival crew moving in on their territory to create a moment of chaos during the transfer. In that chaos, the unconscious Austin was not handed over to Rico's men for a bullet and a weighted drop into the deep ocean trench. Instead, on Brittany's instruction, delivered through a convoluted chain of whispers as a better, more profitable idea from a new buyer, he was loaded onto a different, unmarked truck. His destination was El Abismo, the abyss. A prison carved into the side of a mountain on a remote, desolate island. A place from which no one escaped and few ever returned. It was a living death, but it was death with a heartbeat. To sell his physical death, Brittany had Hector switch Austin's live body with that of a young, unclaimed John Doe from the morgue. She took Austin's heavy platinum signet ring, the one with the McMillan family crest he was never without, and pressed it into the cold, waxy flesh of the corpse's finger before it was dumped into the sea. If anyone ever looked, they would find the ring. Trek, of course, would make sure no one ever did. The world would believe Austin McMillan was dead, lost in a tragic accident at sea during the yacht's maiden voyage. Driven by a guilt she couldn't explain and a justice she felt compelled to serve, Brittany then performed an act of pure, stubborn will. She sold the small gold locket that had been her mother's, the only thing of value she truly owned. With the money, she bought a one-way ticket on a rickety supply boat to the hellish archipelago that housed El Abismo. The journey was a nightmare of vomit and fear. Upon arrival in the miserable, rain-swept port town of Pueblo del Silencio, she secured the only job available to a girl with no papers and no past. A waitress at a filthy cantina called La Sirena, a place frequented by off-duty guards from the prison. It was a pit of despair, but it was close enough to him. It was the only way she could think to provide whatever scant support she could muster. Weeks later, she managed her first glimpse of him. The prisoners were sometimes used for hard labor on the docks, moving crates under the watchful eyes of guards with assault rifles. She saw Austin, or a ghost of him. His expensive clothes were replaced with ragged, stained prison grays. His perfectly styled hair was a matted, filthy mess, but it was his eyes that shocked her the most. The arrogant, bored glint was gone, replaced by a feral, terrified confusion. He was being shoved and beaten, his body trembling with exhaustion. She waited for a moment when a guard was distracted, and she risked it. She met his gaze across the dock and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of recognition, a silent message. "I see you. I'm here." His reaction was not what she hoped for. The confusion in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a white-hot, pure rage. He lunged against the chain that bound him to the other prisoners, his voice a raw, tearing scream that cut through the damp air. "You! This is your doing. You're one of them. A vixen for my cousin. Is this the game? To break me and then offer me a way out for a price? Is it?" The guards laughed and beat him back into line with their rifle butts. Brittany stood frozen, the tray of drinks in her hands shaking. Her hope for gratitude shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one sharp enough to draw blood. He saw her not as a savior, but as the architect of his hell. He screamed her down, accusing her of being a player in his family's game, a cunning spider weaving a web to trap him. He was dragged away, his screams echoing off the stone walls, his words branding her as a villain in the one story where she had tried to be a hero. Furious that no one in this hellhole would believe his true identity, systematically tortured and starved, Austin sank into a deep black despair. He refused to even look in her direction for a full year. He was forgotten by the world, a ghost in a living tomb. And during that year of darkness, the brief, silent visits from Brittany became the only flicker of humanity in his existence. Once a week, she would bribe a marginally kinder guard with a bottle of cheap whiskey to let her leave a small, cloth-wrapped parcel just inside the gate of the high-security wing. It was never much, a piece of fruit not yet rotten, a hunk of hard cheese, sometimes a clean rag. It was a tiny, defiant act of kindness in a place designed to extinguish it. And it was, Austin eventually realized with a dawning, horrifying clarity, the only thing that kept him alive. The year that followed was a study in the systematic dismantling of a man. The Austin McMillan who had screamed at Brittany on the dock did not survive it. He was worn away, grain by grain, by the relentless grind of institutionalized cruelty. The prison, El Abismo, was not a place of rehabilitation, but a machine designed to break human spirits, and it was exquisitely efficient. The food, when there was any, was a thin, greasy gruel often contaminated with weevils. The water was brackish. The cold of the stone cell seeped into his bones at night, and the tropical sun burned his skin during the endless, back-breaking work details. He was nobody. The guards, when they addressed him at all, called him Diablo or Gringo, their tones dripping with contempt. His claims of identity, his rote recitation of his name, his company, his net worth, were met with laughter or a casual, brutal blow to the head. "You are nothing," a guard named El Carnicero, the butcher, would hiss in his ear. "You are less than the dirt under my boot. Your family dumped you here to rot. Forget them." The truth of that statement, even from the lips of A tormentor was a poison that worked its way deeper than any hunger pang, and through it all, there was the parcel. Once a week, like a strange, secular sacrament, a small, cloth-wrapped bundle would appear just inside the bars of his cell. It was never handed to him, never acknowledged. It would simply be there when he was shoved back into the darkness after a day of labor. At first, in his rage, he would kick it away, let it lie in the grime on the floor. He saw it as a taunt, a piece of Brittany's cruel game. But hunger is a primal, undeniable master. One night, a deep gnawing emptiness in his gut sharper than any other, he crawled across the cold stone and retrieved the parcel. His hands, now calloused and scarred, trembled as he unwrapped it. Inside was a piece of mango, its flesh a shocking, vibrant orange against the soiled cloth. It was overripe, a little bruised, but to him it was a treasure beyond any he had ever owned. The taste was an explosion of sweetness, a memory of a world that had color and flavor, and it was the first thing that hadn't tasted of despair in months. He devoured it, skin and all, and wept silent, shuddering tears in the dark. That mango was a crack in his armor. The next week, he did not kick the parcel away. He watched for it. It became the only marker of time in his endless present. A piece of hard cheese, a chunk of coarse bread, a single hard-boiled egg. It was never enough to fill him, but it was enough to sustain him. It was the only viable nutrition he received, the only thing that kept the starvation at bay from one week to the next. This simple, silent charity began to work on him more effectively than any punishment. The arrogance that had been his birthright was slowly sanded away by the grit of this undeniable reality. A girl he had viciously accused, a girl from this wretched place, was keeping him alive. For no reason he could comprehend. In the suffocating silence of his cell, his mind, once a weapon for corporate strategy and luxury, was forced to turn inward. He was haunted by the memory of his own selfish life, the people he had dismissed, the hands he had never deigned to lift to help anyone. He had lived in a world of transactions, and this act of giving with no apparent return, was an alien language he was finally being forced to learn. He understood with a brutal cellular clarity that he was now reaping what he had sown. The universe, in its cold mechanical justice, had delivered him to this hell as the direct consequence of the one he had willingly inhabited his entire life, a hell of his own emotional and moral making. The change was not sudden, but a slow thaw. He stopped glaring at the shadows where Brittany sometimes stood, far down the corridor, watching. He began to look for her. One day, during a work detail, he saw her carrying a crate of bottles into La Sirena. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. A year before, his gaze would have been filled with fire and accusation. Now, it held only a weary, desperate question. A week later, the parcel came as usual. But this time, when the guard shoved him into his cell, Austin did not scramble for it. He sat with his back against the wall, the small bundle lying on the floor between him and the bars. He waited. He heard the soft, familiar footfall. He saw the shadow fall across the dim light from the corridor. Brittany stood there, her form silhouetted in the doorway. She looked at the untouched parcel, then at him. Her expression was cautious, etched with the hardness a year in Pueblo del Silencio had imposed upon her. Austin did not shout. His voice, when it came, was a dry, rasping thing, stripped of all its former privilege and power. It was just a voice. A human voice. Why? He asked. The single word hung in the foul air, containing a universe of pain, confusion, and shattered pride. Brittany did not move for a long moment, studying him, weighing the authenticity of this quietness. Seeing the defeat, the genuine brokenness, she took a hesitant step closer, just to the edge of the light. Because it was wrong, she said, her voice low but clear. What Trek did was wrong, and no one else was going to do anything. He was silent, absorbing this. A motive so simple, so foreign to him, justice. Tell me, he whispered. Tell me what happened. And so she did. She told him everything, standing in the gloom of that stone corridor. She told him about overhearing the plan in her uncle's house, about the cold calculation in Trek's voice. She explained her desperate alternative plan with Old Man Hector and the body from the morgue. She confessed that El Abismo was the only alternative to a grave at the bottom of the sea. She revealed her own shameful background, her family of criminals, and her motive: a simple, powerful disgust at the injustice she had witnessed. Finally, she looked him directly in the eye, her own guilt laid bare. "I have no plan to get you out," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "People do not get out of El Abismo. I don't know how, but I promise you, I will not stop trying." This time, Austin believed her. The last of his defenses crumbled. The narrative of the cunning seductress evaporated, replaced by the far more complex and astounding truth. He had been saved by a moral compass he did not know existed in the world, housed in the heart of an 18-year-old girl from a port slum. A new partnership was forged not in a boardroom, but in the depths of that stinking cell. A grim, determined light returned to Austin's eyes, but it was a different light now, colder, sharper, honed by suffering, and a desire for a justice that went beyond mere escape. He was no longer a trust fund billionaire. He was a prisoner. But he was a prisoner with a mind full of secrets and an ally on the outside. "Then we make a new plan," he rasped, his voice gaining a sliver of its old steel, but tempered now in fire and ice. "We may not be able to get me out, but we can. Make sure Trek never ever rests comfortably again." He gestured for her to come closer. And as the guard down the hall looked away, bored, Austin Macmillan, the forgotten king of a fallen empire, began to whisper his first instructions to his one-woman army. The plan began not with a grand scheme, but with a single name, whispered like a secret prayer against the stone. "Alistair Pennington!" Austin rasped, his voice barely more than a breath. He was the chief financial architect for our European holdings, a nervous man, terrified of his wife discovering his extracurricular tastes. Austin's eyes, once dull with despair, now glittered in the dim cell light. "Find him. Don't approach him directly. Send an anonymous letter to his home address. No return address. The message is just one sentence. The swans in Regent's Park miss their old benefactor. He'll know what it means, and he'll know that I am the only one who could know." Brittany, her heart hammering against her ribs, committed it to memory. This was no longer about survival rations. It was a foray into a shadow war. She traveled to the mainland on her next day off, a journey that felt fraught with new purpose. In a dusty internet cafe, she used her meager savings to access a computer, her fingers clumsy on the keyboard as she searched for Alistair Pennington. She found him, his face pale and anxious in a corporate headshot. Sending the letter felt like releasing a bird into a hurricane, a tiny, fragile thing against a vast, powerful storm. Weeks passed. The parcels continued, but now they sometimes contained more than food. Tucked inside a loaf of bread was a cheap, prepaid cell phone, wrapped in waterproof plastic. Hidden in a bundle of rags was a slip of paper with a single, untraceable email address. The communication line was open. The first response was a seismic shift. Brittany, huddled in the storage room of La Serena, nearly dropped the phone when it vibrated with an email from an unknown sender. The message was terse, terrified. "He's consolidating, liquidating the old offshore entities you controlled, the Crimson Legacy Trust, the Peregrine Growth Fund. He's moving fast, says it's posthumous restructuring." Austin, upon receiving the transcribed message during Brittany's next visit, let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He's not just stealing from me," he whispered, his knuckles white as he gripped the bars. "He's erasing me. The Crimson Legacy was my first successful solo venture. He's dismantling my legacy." This betrayal lit a new, colder fire within him. His instructions became more complex, a cascade of financial arcana and corporate secrets. He gave Brittany account numbers, passwords constructed from the birthdays of former mistresses Trek thought no one knew about, the names of shell companies hidden in layers of bureaucracy. "He's using a law firm in Zurich," Austin dictated, his mind a flawless ledger of his former life. "Schmidt and Bauer," Find a way to hint to them that there are questions about the probate of the obelisk capital holdings. Suggest an audit. Don't make it a threat. Make it sound like prudent caution. Brittany became a ghost in the machine of Trek's empire. From the filthy cantina, she waged a guerrilla war. She used the computer at the local library, always through encrypted proxies Austen had taught her to use. She placed calls from the cell phone, her voice steady as she posed as a junior clerk from a fictional auditing firm, sowing seeds of doubt and bureaucratic delay. She learned the language of this new battlefield: bearer bonds, blind trusts, hostile takeovers. Her mind, sharpened by a life of street-smart survival, adapting with breathtaking speed. Austen, in his cell, was the general. His world was now defined by the brief, whispered updates Brittany delivered. The outside world, with its markets and boardrooms, became more real to him than the stone walls around him. He lived for the scent of rain on her jacket when she arrived, for the faint smell of soap on the paper she sometimes smuggled in with notes. She was his eyes, his ears, his hands, and in the long, silent hours between her visits, he plotted. He remembered every slight, every vulnerability, every secret sin of his cousin's life. "He has a tell," Austen said one evening, his voice low, focused hum. When he's bluffing in a negotiation, he taps his Montblanc pen twice on the table. Always twice. I saw him do it when we acquired the Singapore Apex subsidiary. He was nervous. He's always been nervous. He just hides it better than Alistair. He looked at Brittany, his gaze intense. "We don't need to beat him in a straight fight. We just need to make him nervous enough to tap that pen until it breaks." Their efforts began to bear strange, bitter fruit. An article appeared in a financial blog, questioning the sudden dissolution of the Crimson Legacy Trust. A minor shareholder in one of Trek's newly consolidated companies filed a request for more transparency. They were pinpricks, nothing more. But pinpricks in the right place could be deeply distracting. Then, Trek made his first mistake. Perhaps feeling the pressure, he decided to solidify his narrative. A glossy, sympathetic profile was published. In a major business magazine, portraying Trek as the grieving cousin, bravely steering the family empire through the tragedy of Austen's loss. The article featured a photo of Trek on the deck of the Anthem, the very yacht from which he had orchestrated Austen's demise, a somber, dignified expression on his face. When Brittany showed Austen the printed picture, smuggled in with his food, a transformation came over him. The grim determination solidified into something harder, more absolute. The sight of his cousin standing in his place, wearing his grief as a costume, was the final, unforgivable provocation. "He's enjoying this," Austen said, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked at Brittany, the chasm of their pasts, the billionaire and the waitress, utterly irrelevant now. There was only the mission. It's not enough to disrupt him. We need to make him bleed. He had given her secrets about money. Now, he gave her a secret about a man. "There's a woman," he whispered, the words tasting of old dust and betrayal. "An actress. Her name is Lena Petrova. It was years ago. Trek was obsessed. He bought her an apartment in Paris. My father found out, threatened to cut him off. He forced Trek to end it. Trek never got over it. It's his one truly sentimental vulnerability. He met Brittany's gaze. Find her. Don't threaten her. Just let her know that Trek is using the story of my death to cement his power. Suggest that a man who would do that to his own blood is capable of anything. Let her draw her own conclusions." The assignment felt different, darker. This was not about finance. It was about the heart. Brittany felt a tremor of unease, but she saw the cold fire in Austen's eyes and knew there was no turning back. The trust fund prisoner was gone. In his place was something else entirely, an avenger, patiently weaving his own rope from the shadows of his cell, and she was the one who would throw it over the wall. The air in the cantina, always thick with the smell of stale beer and fried plantains, now felt charged with a new, dangerous energy. Brittany's mission to find Lena Petrova was a world away from manipulating financial bureaucracies. It required a different kind of cunning, one that felt more intimate and somehow more treacherous. Using the sparse details Austen had provided, say, name, a forgotten Parisian apartment, a career on the stage, she began her search. It was like looking for a single, specific person in a city of millions, all from a computer terminal in a humid, backwater library. Days of fruitless searching turned into a week. Then, she found a flicker. A decade-old playbill for a small avant-garde theater in Montmartre. Lena Petrova, listed in the supporting cast. The grainy black and white photo showed a woman with intense eyes and a sharp, elegant bone structure. Brittany felt a strange pang, looking at the face of the woman who held a piece of Trek's carefully guarded heart. She was no longer targeting a faceless corporation. She was targeting a memory. Following this thread, she discovered that Lena had left acting years ago. She now ran a small, exclusive art gallery in the Marais district, a world of quiet white walls and whispered prices. This was a fortress of taste, and Brittany, a waitress from a criminal port, had no idea how to breach it. A direct approach was impossible. An email would be deleted. A letter, ignored. It was Austen, in one of their hushed, frantic conferences, at the prison gate, who provided the key. He never liked the art she liked, Austen whispered, his voice a dry rustle. He called it sentimental trash. He bought her a Pissarro once, because it was a good investment. She hated it. She loved the work of a Spanish sculptor, a nobody named Esteban Ruiz. Trek thought it was junk. His eyes met Brittany's, the strategic genius that had built an empire now focused on this single, personal strike. Use that. Make her listen. Brittany spent her next 2 paychecks from the cantina on a single, expensive long-distance call. Posing as a researcher for a potential biography on Ruiz, her voice carefully stripped of its local accent. She managed to get through to the gallery. She spoke to an assistant about the artist's forgotten period, a detail she'd fabricated from scraps of information. Then, as if it were an afterthought, she said, "I understand a friend of his early work, a Ms. Lena Petrova, might still be in Paris. We'd love to include her recollections, if she's amenable." The assistant, polite but non-committal, took her name and a fake callback number. Brittany hung up, her palms slick with sweat. It was a shot in the dark. The response came not to the fake number, but to a new encrypted email account Austen had instructed her to create. The subject line was simple. Rey Esteban Ruiz. The message was from Lena herself. How did you find me? And how did you know about my interest in Ruiz? That was a lifetime ago. This was the opening. Brittany's fingers trembled as she typed, following the script she and Austen had painstakingly crafted. She admitted the Ruiz biography was a pretext. She wrote that she had come across information suggesting that the man from Lena's past, Trek Macmillan, was not the man he appeared to be, that his recent very public grief was a performance, that he had in fact orchestrated the death of his own cousin to seize power. A man who could do that to his own blood, Brittany typed, the words feeling heavy and final, is capable of betraying anyone. I thought you should know. She hit send. The digital letter flew into the ether, a single stone thrown into the silent pond of a stranger's past. There was no immediate reply. For days, the silence was agonizing. Had she miscalculated? Had she alienated the one person who might have been able to get under Trek's skin? Then a week later, a new email arrived. It contained no text, only a single grainy photograph, scanned from what looked like a society magazine. It showed Trek Macmillan at a charity gala in New York, his arm linked with that of a stunning blonde socialite. The photo was dated just 2 weeks after Austen's death. The caption read, Trek Macmillan and companion Helena Vance enjoy the evening. A show of resilience after a family tragedy. Lena's message was clear. She had believed, and she was now a silent, furious ally. When Brittany showed the email to Austen, a slow, grim smile spread across his haggard face. It was the first true smile she had ever seen from him, and it held no joy, only the cold satisfaction of a checkmate move seen from 1,000 miles away. He's vulnerable now, Austin breathed. He'll be looking over his shoulder, wondering who else from his past is turning against him. It will make him sloppy, and sloppy he became. Alistair Pennington, emboldened by the subtle chaos Brittany was sowing, sent another frantic email. He's panicking. He's rushing the liquidation of the Peregrine Fund and moving the assets to a new entity, the Apex Horizon LLC. The paperwork is messy. He's cutting corners. This was the crack they had been waiting for. A rushed, messy financial move, undertaken by a man whose mind was now clouded by personal paranoia. Austin's eyes blazed with a hunter's focus. "This is it," he told Brittany, his voice electric with intensity. "This is the thread. Apex Horizon. Pull it. Find everything you can. We're not just pricking him anymore. We're going to unravel him." The game had escalated beyond revenge. It was now a hunt. And in his stone cell, the prisoner held the leash, while his waitress, his only connection to the world, began to pull with all her strength. The name Apex Horizon LLC became their entire world. In the stagnant heat of his cell, Austin's mind, a fortress of financial data and corporate memory, laid siege to it. He dictated to Brittany a torrent of information, the names of law firms Trek had used for sensitive matters over a decade, the specific notary public in the Cayman Islands who had a history of lax oversight, the internal accounting codes that would have been used to authorize the transfer. "It's a rush job," Austin whispered, his voice raw but precise. He wouldn't have had time to create an entirely new structure. He'll have used an old shell, something dormant. Look for the Sierra Victor Corporate Registry. It was a holding company for a failed mining venture in Botswana. The paperwork is still active, but the assets are zero. It's perfect for this. Brittany, in the flickering light of the library computer, followed his trail. She felt like an archaeologist, brushing away digital dust to uncover the contours of a crime. Using the details Austin provided, she posed as a paralegal from a fictional London firm, making inquiries to the Cayman Islands Registry about the status of Sierra Victor Holdings. The response was a bland, automated email confirming the company's active status and a recent change of registered agent, a small obscure firm in Zurich that Austin immediately identified as a front Schmidt and Bauer used for their most discreet and often dirtiest work. "It's him," Austin said, his eyes burning with a cold fire when she relayed the news. "It's a perfect fit. Now we need proof of the money flow. We need to link Apex Horizon directly to the liquidated assets of the Peregrine Fund." This was a taller order. It required penetrating deeper, more secure layers of financial infrastructure. Brittany's attempts to access the necessary databases hit digital walls. The frustration was a physical weight. They were so close, yet the final damning evidence remained out of reach, locked behind firewalls and encryption that her rudimentary skills couldn't bypass. It was then that Austin, in a moment of grim inspiration, played his most dangerous card. He gave Brittany another name, not of a person, but of a system. "The Janus Gateway," he said, the words barely audible. "It's a backdoor access protocol my father had built into the core of our financial network, a failsafe in case the government ever tried to freeze our assets. Only 3 people knew it ever existed: my father, me, and Trek." He looked at Brittany, his expression grave. "If I give you the access codes and you trigger it, it will create a ghost-level administrative account. You'll be able to see everything. But the moment you log in, it will send a silent alert to the primary system administrator. That's Trek. He'll know someone is using Janus. He'll know it's me." The risk was staggering. It was a direct declaration of war. It would tell Trek, unequivocally, that Austin was not only alive, but that he was actively hunting him. It would shatter the anonymity that had been Brittany's only protection. Brittany didn't hesitate. She met his gaze, her own resolve hardening into something as unyielding as the prison stone. "Do it," she said. The following hours were a blur of tense, frantic activity. Austin whispered a string of complex alphanumeric codes and a multi-step authentication process. Brittany transcribed them onto a scrap of paper, her handwriting cramped and hurried. That night in the deserted library, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, she entered the digital fortress of the Macmillan Empire. The Janus Gateway worked, the screen flooded with data, a river of raw financial information. She navigated through it, following Austen's precise instructions, until she found it. A perfect, unbroken digital chain. Millions of dollars from the liquidated Peregrine Fund, funneled through a series of intermediary banks, all flowing directly into the account of Apex Horizon LLC, which was, as they knew, the resurrected shell of Sierra Victor Holdings. The final transfer was authorized by a digital signature with a unique encryption key that Austen identified instantly. It belonged to Trek. She had it. The proof. The entire meticulously documented paper trail of Trek's theft laid bare. As she began downloading the files, a new separate alert flashed on the screen, a single, ominous line of text in a security log. Janus Gateway active, user, route, location, undetermined. The hunt was over. The prey now knew it was being hunted. Back. At the prison, as Brittany whispered her success, a different kind of tension filled the air. The victory felt fragile, overshadowed by the new peril they had invited. But as Austen absorbed the news, a profound change came over him. The cold, vengeful strategist seemed to recede, replaced by a man looking at the woman who had just risked everything for him. The money, the company, he began, his voice losing its strategic edge, becoming softer, more human. It doesn't matter. Not compared to this. Not compared to what you've done. He was cut off as the heavy tramp of boots echoed down the corridor. El Carnicero and two other guards appeared, their faces set in grim masks. "On your feet, Diablo!" the butcher snarled, unlocking the cell door with a violent clang. "Warden wants to see you. Now." Austen shot a last desperate look at Brittany, a look filled with warning, with fear for her, and with a silent, unspoken message of gratitude that hung between them. Then he was dragged away, leaving Brittany alone in the sudden, terrifying silence, the digital proof of their victory burning like a phantom weight in her pocket, and the chilling certainty that Trek now knew his cousin was very much alive. The silence after they dragged Austen away was a physical blow to Brittany's chest, a vacuum of sound that screamed of his peril. The proof in her pocket felt insignificant against the visceral fear that Trek's retaliation would be swift and final. She had to act. Now. Fueled by a fear far greater than any she'd known, she executed their endgame with ruthless efficiency. In the dusty library, her hands steady with purpose, she assembled the digital bomb, the financial trail, the corporate shells, Trek's signature, and the damning photograph from Lena. She uploaded it to the world and lit the fuse, sending the link to every news outlet and authority she could find. Then, she erased her digital footprint, her heart hammering a single desperate name: Austen. In the warden's office, Austen braced for a beating, for a bullet, for the sound of Trek's gloating voice on the phone. The voice that crackled through the satellite phone was instead his grandfather's, roaring with a fury that spanned continents. "Austen, by God, it's you. We've seen it all. The snake is finished." As his grandfather detailed Trek's downfall and promised a rescue team, Austen felt no triumph. He felt only a profound, clarifying emptiness for the empire he had lost, and a single blazing point of light in the darkness. Brittany. She had done it. She had torn down a giant from a filthy cantina, all for him. That clarity was short-lived. Thrown into the lightless oubliette, he knew the warden's help was a lie. This was where he would die, just as freedom was within reach. In the absolute black, his mind didn't conjure images of his penthouse, or his yacht. It conjured her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the way her hand had felt, warm and steady, when she'd passed him a parcel of food. The scraping at the door, the click of the lock, felt like a miracle. When it swung open, framing her silhouetted against the chaotic gloom of the prison, his heart stopped. She was here. She had come for him, again. There was no time for words. Their flight through the chaotic corridors was a symphony of shared terror and unspoken trust. When a guard lunged from the shadows, Austin, with a strength he didn't know, he possessed, shoved the man back, shielding Brittany with his own body. Their eyes met for a fractured second, a flash of shock, of gratitude, of something more. They scrambled over the final wall, dropping into the freedom of the muddy ditch, and ran until their lungs burned, not stopping until they reached this hidden cove and the rickety fishing boat. As the engine sputtered to life and carried them away from the hell of El Abismo, Austin collapsed on the deck, gulping in the clean, salt air of a free man. He looked at Brittany at the helm, her hair whipping in the wind, her face turned toward the horizon. She was no longer the girl from the port or the waitress from the cantina. She was everything. He crawled to her side, his body aching, his soul raw. He didn't reach for the wheel. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. She started at the touch, then her grip tightened, anchoring him. "It's all gone," he said, his voice rough with emotion, his eyes locked on hers. The money, the name, the empire, it was all a gilded cage. I was a prisoner long before Trek put me in one. He brought her knuckles to his lips, the gesture one of reverence, not conquest. "You didn't just free me from that prison, Brittany. You freed me from myself. What I feel for you. It's the only real fortune I've ever known." Tears welled in Brittany's eyes, cutting clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She saw the truth in his gaze. The arrogant billionaire was gone, erased by hardship, and replaced by a man she had fought for, bled for, and, against all odds, fallen for. "I didn't do it for gratitude," she whispered, her voice thick. "I know," he said, his thumb stroking her hand. "You did it because it was right. And that is why I love you." The word hung between them, as vast and terrifying as the ocean around them. Then a radiant, true smile broke through her weariness. It was the first he had ever seen from her, and it felt like the dawn itself. "I love you too, Austin Macmillan," she said, the name no longer a title, but a promise. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. Their kiss was not gentle, but fierce and desperate, a sealing of a vow written in survival and sealed in freedom. It tasted of salt tears and the sweet, undeniable flavor of a future they had stolen back together. When they parted, breathless, Brittany cut the engine. In the sudden, profound quiet, with the sun blazing a path of gold on the water before them, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "Where do we go?" she asked, the whole world now a possibility. He looked from the endless horizon back to her eyes, his home now found not in a place, but in a person. "Anywhere," he whispered. "Everywhere, as long as it's with you." Hand in hand, the trust fund prince and the waitress queen turned their boat away from the shadows of the past and sailed, united, into the brilliant, unwritten day. If their story of impossible love and hard-won freedom found a home in your heart, then don't miss the next epic romance from the Worthington Chronicles. Subscribe to the channel and join us for our next great adventure.